Please forgive me, I can't live without you. Look at me, I'm begging you!
The story opens at the height of a lavish Seoul wedding. The air is thick with the scent of white roses, but the groom, Minute-ho, isn't looking at his bride. I can't sign the certificate, Angela, he whispers loud enough for the front row to gasp. Hannah just called. She's fainted again. I have to be the one to take her to the clinic, and about the child I promised her. You're strong, you'll understand why I have to leave. This immediate betrayal, choosing a fragile sister-in-law over a loyal bride, creates an instant sense of visceral injustice. Before we get into the total destruction of a man who thought he could discard a queen like a pawn, hit that subscribe button. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. Now, let's see what happens when a weak man's pride meets a Mafia king's wrath. The heavy oak doors of the cathedral slammed shut, the echo vibrating through the marble floor like a final, mocking gavel. Minute-ho was gone. He had walked away from 6 years of devotion and a multi-million-won ceremony to chase the fragile whim of a woman who had spent years treating Angela like a personal ATM. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the Seoul elite gathered in the pews. Then, the whispering began. It was a low, sibilant sound, the sound of 100 socialites sharpening their knives to shred the reputation of the discarded foreigner. Angela felt the heat of their judgment, the pity that felt more like a physical stain on her structured white gown. But Angela Daniels did not tremble. She did not reach for her veil to hide the tears that the crowd was so hungry to see. Instead, she stood with a statuesque composure that bordered on the terrifying. Her eyes, steady and unflinching, scanned the unsigned marriage certificate resting on the altar. Then, they shifted. She didn't look toward the exit where her fiancé had vanished. She looked toward the front row VIP section, landing on the one man who hadn't whispered, hadn't gasped, and hadn't looked away. Yi-jun sat with a controlled dominance that made the air around him feel thin. His black suit was sharp, a dark shadow against the white lilies of the church. The intricate tattoos creeping up his neck were a silent warning of the violence he commanded, a stark contrast to the polished businessmen surrounding him. He was the man Minute-ho feared most. He was the man who held the notes on Minute-ho's spiraling gambling debts, debts Angela had secretly been paying to keep her fiancé's reputation intact. Until now. The rustle of Angela's silk train was the only sound as she began to walk. She didn't head for the doors. She walked directly toward the Mafia kingpin. The gasps from the pews followed her like a trail of fire, but she didn't hear them. Her focus was entirely on the unreadable, chillingly calm face of the man in the black suit. She stopped at the edge of his pew. Standing over him, she looked less like a jilted bride and more like a queen choosing a new general. "Mr. Kang," Angela said, her voice a cool, clear bell that cut through the murmurs. "My former fiancé owes your syndicate 4 billion won. He intended to use my personal assets to settle that debt after our vows. Since he has chosen to forfeit those assets, his life is effectively in your hands." Yi-jun's dark eyes flickered, a ghost of interest appearing in his otherwise glacial expression. He didn't stand. He simply leaned back, his posture relaxed but watchful. "And why are you telling me this, Ms. Daniels? Should I go catch him for you?" "No," Angela replied, her gaze resolute. "I'm proposing a more efficient liquidation. The marriage certificate is already at the altar. The priest is still on the clock. The socialites are already here to witness a union." She leaned in slightly, the scent of her white roses mingling with the cold, expensive tobacco of his presence. "Sign the certificate with me. As your wife, I will provide the legal legitimacy your shipping empire has been denied for years. My medical patents and American board seats will be the shield your family needs from the authorities. In return, you will wipe Minute-ho's debt, let the interest accrue until it swallows him whole, and give me the protection of your name while I dismantle his world." A collective intake of breath hissed through the cathedral. It was a madness, an alliance of steel and shadow. Minute-ho's parents stood up, their faces pale with horror, but a single, infinitesimal glance from Yi-jun's bodyguard froze them in their tracks. Yi-jun remained silent for a heartbeat that felt like an eternity. He looked at Angela, not at her beauty, but at her strength. He saw the inner steel that Minute-ho had been too weak to handle. He saw a woman who wasn't asking for a savior, but offering a throne. Slowly, Yi-jun stood. He was taller than he appeared while seated, a predator finally revealing his full height. He didn't offer her a romantic smile. He offered her a hand that had likely ended lives with the same precision with which he was about to start a new one. "A marriage of convenience," he murmured, his voice a low growl of approval. "I find I have a sudden opening in my schedule for a queen." He stepped into the aisle, his presence alone shifting the balance of power in the room. He didn't look at the guests. He looked only at the woman who had turned the greatest humiliation of her life into a declaration of war. As they walked together toward the altar, Angela didn't look back at the doors. She looked forward at the path of ruthless vengeance she was about to pave, hand in hand with the devil himself. The silent engine was gone. The driver had taken the wheel, and she was headed for total destruction. The black sedan moved through the neon-drenched streets of Seoul like a shard of obsidian, silent and untouchable. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of cold leather and the lingering, floral ghost of Angela's bridal bouquet. She sat perfectly still, her white silk skirts taking up the majority of the backseat, a stark, bright contrast to Yi-jun's darkness. He didn't speak. He didn't offer a platitude about her heartbreak or a reassuring touch. He simply watched the city go by, his profile as sharp and unyielding as a mountain ridge. When the car pulled into the gated estate on the outskirts of the city, the atmosphere shifted. This wasn't a home, it was a fortress of glass, steel, and shadow. Men in dark suits stood at every perimeter, their eyes scanning the vehicle with clinical precision. They didn't bow with the subservient warmth Angela had grown used to with Minute-Ho's family. They bowed with the stiff, fearful respect reserved for a king and his new, unpredictable consort. As the car door opened, Angela stepped out, her heels clicking against the stone courtyard. She looked at the white roses in her hand, the symbols of purity and a new beginning she had once shared with a man who had left her for a lie. Without a word, she let the bouquet fall. It hit the pavement with a soft thud, soon to be crushed under the tires of the next arriving guard car. She didn't look back. Inside, the penthouse was a masterpiece of minimalist intimidation. "This is your world now," Yi-jun said, his voice a low vibration in the expansive, quiet room. He walked to a sleek mahogany bar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. "In my world, there is no room for the softness you practiced for Minute-Ho. No more playing the supporting role. No more hidden sacrifices." He stepped toward her, handing her a glass. His eyes traced the delicate lace of her gown, a dress designed for a different life. "You are no longer a doctor seeking a family. You are the woman who owns the man who owns this city. Do you understand what that requires?" Angela took the glass, her fingers steady. She walked to a floor-to-ceiling mirror that reflected a woman who looked like a stranger. The veil was still pinned to her hair, a gossamer shroud of a dead dream. She reached up, and with a sharp, decisive tug, she ripped the delicate fabric from her head. Several strands of dark hair came with it, but she didn't flinch. She dropped the veil to the floor, treading over it as she moved toward Yi-jun. "I spent 6 years being a shield for a weak man," she said, her voice dropping an octave into something cold and metallic. "I fixed his mistakes, paid his debts, and healed his family's wounds while they bled me dry. I've had enough of healing, Yi-jun. I want to be the one who cuts." A slow, dangerous smile ghosted across Yi-jun's lips. It wasn't a smile of affection, but of recognition, the look of a predator realizing he had finally found an equal. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy, platinum ring, its center a black diamond that seemed to swallow the light. He didn't ask her to marry him, that had been decided at the altar. He simply took her hand and slid the weight onto her finger. "The Hua family thinks they discarded a foreigner," Yi-jun murmured, his thumb tracing the pulse at her wrist, which was beating with a slow, rhythmic calm. "Tomorrow, they will realize they unleashed a plague." At that moment, a man burst into the room, one of Yi-jun's lieutenants, his face pale. "Boss, Minute-Ho is at the secondary office. He's demanding to see the debt ledgers. He thinks he can negotiate because of the wedding." Yi-jun didn't even turn around. He looked at Angela, a silent test in his gaze. Angela took a slow sip of the whiskey, the burn familiar and welcome. She looked at the lieutenant, her expression so detached it was chilling. "Negotiation is a privilege for those with leverage," she said. "Minute-Ho has none. Tell him that his debts are no longer being paid in currency. Tell him they are being moved to my personal ledger. And tell him." She paused, the black diamond on her hand glinting. Tell him the Queen is looking forward to seeing him soon. The lieutenant hesitated, looking to Yi Jun for confirmation. The Mafia boss merely tilted his head toward Angela, a silent declaration of her new authority. As the man hurried out, the silence in the room returned, but it was different now. It was a silence of absolute ownership. Angela looked out over the glowing grid of Seoul, the city she had once tried to win with kindness. That woman was dead, left behind in the pews of a cathedral. The woman standing in the glass fortress was made of steel and shadow, and she was just getting started. Angela Daniels did not wake up as a grieving bride, she woke up as an executioner. The morning light in Yi Jun's penthouse was clinical and sharp, reflecting off the glass desk where Angela sat, her fingers moving across a sleek laptop with surgical precision. She was no longer wearing the white silk of a sacrificial lamb. She was dressed in a tailored black suit that fit like armor, her dark hair pulled back into a tight, severe bun. For 6 years, she had been the silent architect of Minute Ho's success. She had managed the portfolios, signed the guarantees, and funneled the royalties from her medical patents into a family fund that had become the Hua family's only true source of wealth. Minute Ho had mistaken her silence for a lack of ego. He was about to learn that the engine doesn't just drive the car, it can also stop it dead in the middle of a highway. Begin with the Hua Group's secondary credit lines, Angela murmured, her voice devoid of any warmth. Yi Jun stood by the window, a silent predator watching the city he ruled. He didn't need to intervene. He simply provided the digital fortress she needed to work without interference. They're overextended on the Gangnam development, he noted, his voice a low rumble. If those lines vanish today, they won't make payroll by Friday. That's the point, Angela replied. With a single, definitive keystroke, she revoked the personal guarantee she had provided for the Hua family's primary bank accounts. In an instant, the black cards Minute Ho and his mother used to flaunt their status became nothing more than useless pieces of plastic. Next, she moved to the medical files. This was her home turf. She logged into the portal for the VIP clinic where Hannah was supposedly clinging to life. She saw the invoices, outrageous sums for experimental treatments and round-the-clock nursing that Angela had been paying for without question. She picked up the phone. Her voice was professional, cold, and utterly final. This is Dr. Angela Daniels. I am the primary financier for patient Hannah's private suite. Effective immediately, all funding is withdrawn. Discontinue the concierge service. If the Hua family wants to keep her in a VIP wing, they can provide their own collateral. Otherwise, move her to the general ward. The administrator on the other end stammered, but Dr. Daniels, Mr. Minute Ho said. Mr. Minute Ho is a man with a negative balance, Angela interrupted. Don't let his delusions of grandeur cost your clinic money. Transfer her by noon. She hung up and turned her attention to the social memberships. The country clubs, the elite preschools for his sister's children, the luxury car leases, all of them were tied to her American board seats and her credit rating. One by one, she severed the ties. She wasn't just taking her money, she was removing the oxygen from their social lives. By 10 a.m., the first tremors of the earthquake reached the penthouse. Angela's phone began to vibrate incessantly on the glass table. Minute Ho's name flashed across the screen. Then his mother's. Then Hannah's. Angela didn't answer. She watched the phone crawl across the desk with the vibration, a dying insect struggling for life. Across the city, in a high-end boutique in Apguge, Minute Ho stood at the counter. He was trying to buy a diamond bracelet for Hannah to calm her nerves after the wedding debacle. He flashed his platinum card with the practiced arrogance of a man who had never been told no. The clerk swiped the card. A pause. She swiped it again. Her expression shifted from sycophantic to suspicious. I'm sorry, Mr. Hua. The transaction was declined. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. Don't be ridiculous, Minute Ho snapped, his face reddening. Check it again. There's no limit on that account. It's not a limit issue, sir, the clerk said, her voice dropping to a tone that made the other wealthy patrons turn their heads. The account has been closed. By the primary holder. Minute Ho froze. His phone chimed, a notification from his landlord. The lease on his penthouse, which had been guaranteed by Angela's medical firm, had been flagged for immediate termination due to a breach of contract. He stepped out onto the sidewalk, his breath coming in shallow hitches. He tried to call his mother, but she picked up screaming. The repo men were already at the house for the luxury SUVs Angela had gifted them. In the penthouse, Angela finally closed her laptop. She looked up at Yi-jun, her eyes as cold as the black diamond on her finger. "The lifeline is cut," she said. Yi-jun walked over, placing a hand on the back of her chair. He didn't offer a celebratory drink. He simply looked at the digital wreckage she had created. "The fall is always faster than the climb," he observed. "They haven't even hit the ground yet," Angela replied, her composure statuesque and terrifying. "I want them to feel every inch of the drop." Angela did not walk into the Seoul International Clinic as a doctor or a jilted bride. She arrived as a silent storm. The staff, who had spent years bowing to her expertise and her generous endowments, now looked at her with a new, sharper kind of fear. Behind her, two of Yi-jun's men stood like statues of obsidian, their presence a silent command that no one, not even the chief of medicine, dare bar her path. For years, Hannah's delicate health had been the anchor dragging Angela's life into the depths. Every time Angela and Minute-ho planned a trip, a dinner, or a future, Hannah would suffer a vague neurological episode or a heart flutter that required Minute-ho's immediate, frantic presence. The ultimate blow had been the pregnancy, the supposedly high-risk miracle that had finally lured Minute-ho away from the altar. Angela walked straight to the high-security diagnostic wing. She didn't ask for permission. She sat at the main terminal and slid her master keycard into the reader. Her medical credentials were international. Her authority was absolute. "Dr. Daniels, we were told patient Hannah's files were under private seal by Mr. Hua," a young resident stammered, his face pale as he looked from Angela to the grim-faced men behind her. "Mr. Hua is no longer the guarantor of this facility," Angela said, her eyes never leaving the screen. "I am. And in my world, there are no secrets from the person holding the scalpel." She bypassed the encryption in seconds. Her eyes scanned the blood work, the ultrasounds, and the hormone panels. A cold, bitter smile touched her lips. To a layman or a man blinded by white lotus tears like Minute-ho, the charts looked terrifying. But to a world-class physician, the patterns were a joke. "HCG levels inconsistent with gestational age," Angela murmured to the empty air. "Synthetic hormone mimics in the toxicology report. And these MRI scans of the brain lesion." She enlarged the image, her finger tracing a faint digital artifact at the corner of the frame. "These aren't Hannah's. These were lifted from a patient in the oncology ward 3 years ago." She pulled a flash drive from her pocket, downloaded the raw data, and stood up. She didn't feel relief. She felt a deep, vibrating contempt. Minute-ho hadn't just left her, he had left her for a cheap, digital forgery. She moved toward the VIP wing. The sound of her heels on the polished floor was like a countdown. She reached Suite 701 and pushed the doors open without knocking. Inside, the scene was a tableau of pathetic devotion. Hannah was reclined on a mountain of pillows, a delicate silk scarf wrapped around her head, looking pale and ethereal under the dim lights. Minute-ho was on a chair beside her, his head bowed, clutching her hand as if it were the only thing keeping her on earth. "She's sleeping, Angela," Minute-ho hissed, looking up with a face haggard from a night of panic. "Haven't you done enough? You've frozen the accounts. You've humiliated us. Isn't your vengeance satisfied?" "I haven't even started with vengeance, Minute-ho," Angela said, her voice a terrifying whisper. "I'm still in the stage of truth-telling." Hannah's eyelids fluttered. She let out a soft, rehearsed moan. "Minute-ho, is it the doctor? Is the baby okay?" "The baby is fine, Hannah," Angela said, stepping into the light. "Mostly because the baby doesn't exist. It's hard for a phantom to be in any real danger." Minute-ho stood up, his face contorting. "How dare you? I saw the scans. I saw the morning sickness." "You saw what a desperate woman and a bribed lab technician wanted you to see," Angela said. She tossed the printouts onto the bed. They fluttered over Hannah's silk sheets like dead leaves. The HCG in her system was from regular injections of Overdrel. The fainting spells were a result of low-dose beta-blockers she was self-administering to drop her blood pressure on command. And the brain tumor. Angela pointed to the MRI sheet. That belongs to a 60-year-old man who died in 2021. Minute-Ho's eyes darted to the papers. He grabbed them, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. He looked at the toxicology report. He looked at the timestamp on the stolen MRI. Hannah sat up, the fragile mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Her eyes weren't misty with pain, they were sharp with the panic of a trapped animal. She's lying, Minute-Ho. She's using her power to fake the records. She wants to destroy us. I don't need to fake anything, Hannah, Angela said, her statuesque composure making the room feel like a tomb. I've already sent the original, unedited files to the Hua Group's board of directors and the medical ethics committee. By tonight, you'll be facing insurance fraud charges. And Minute-Ho. She turned to her former fiancé, whose world was visibly crumbling as he looked from the evidence in his hands to the woman in the bed. You didn't leave a queen for a mother, Angela said, her voice cold and final. You left a queen for a ghost. Enjoy your empty nursery. She turned and walked out, her black suit disappearing into the corridor, leaving Minute-Ho in a silence that was far more painful than any scream. The air in the private backroom of the Blue Velvet Club was thick with the scent of expensive cigars and a tension so palpable it felt like a low-frequency hum. This was the inner circle, a collection of grey-haired men who controlled the veins of Seoul's illicit and legitimate industries. At the head of the table sat Elder Choi, a man whose withered appearance belied a ruthlessness that had kept him alive for 8 decades. Yi-jun sat opposite him, his posture deceptively relaxed, though the hand resting on the table was closed into a tight, white-knuckled fist. His shipping empire was being choked. A massive pharmaceutical shipment, one that bridged the gap between his legitimate medical supply business and his underworld influence, was being held at the Incheon docks under a suspicious biohazard quarantine. Every hour the ships sat idle, Yi-jun lost millions, and more importantly, his reputation among the other syndicates began to fray. It's a delicate matter, Yi-jun, Elder Choi said, his voice a dry rasp. Safety is paramount. Perhaps if you hadn't brought a distraction into your house, your focus wouldn't have slipped. The Incheon ports require a steady hand, not one softened by a foreigner's wedding drama. The men around the table chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. Angela sat beside Yi-jun, her black silk dress blending into the shadows. She had been ignored since they entered, treated as part of the furniture. But while they spoke, her eyes had never stopped moving. She wasn't looking at their ledgers, she was looking at Elder Choi's hands. She noticed the slight, rhythmic tremor in his right index finger, the yellowish tint at the corners of his eyes, and the way he leaned slightly to the left to avoid putting weight on his hip. The ships aren't being held because of a biohazard, Angela said, her voice cutting through the laughter like a cold blade. Elder Choi's smile vanished. He turned his glacial gaze toward her. The girl speaks. Tell me, doctor, do you think your medical degree gives you a seat at this table? I don't need a seat at the table to see that you're dying, Mr. Choi, Angela replied, her composure statuesque and terrifyingly calm. She stood up, walking slowly around the table. Yi-jun didn't move to stop her, he simply watched, his eyes gleaming with a dark, expectant pride. She stopped behind Elder Choi. You've been blocking the shipment because you need the leverage to negotiate with the Japanese pharmaceutical conglomerate for a specific, unreleased trial drug. You have stage 3 hepatic carcinoma, and you've kept it a secret from your own board, knowing they would devour you the moment they realized you were weak. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. The room went deathly silent. Choi's guard stepped forward, but a sharp, silent gesture from Yi-jun stopped them. You think you've hidden it well with the expensive makeup and the tailored suits, Angela continued, her voice clinical and detached. But your labs have been faking your reports for months. I know this because the lead pathologist at the clinic you use is a former colleague of mine, one whose gambling debts I've been quietly settling for years. He's much more loyal to the person who pays his bills than the man who threatens his life. She leaned down, whispering just loud enough for the table to hear. The drug you're waiting for won't save you. In fact, given your current blood urea levels, it will cause a systemic shutdown within 48 hours. You aren't negotiating for your life, you're negotiating for a faster funeral. Elder Choi's face turned a sickly shade of grey. His bravado evaporated, leaving behind a terrified old man. You're bluffing." "I don't bluff," Angela said. She pulled a tablet from her bag and slid it across the table. It displayed a complex chemical analysis and a revised treatment plan. "That is the correct synthetic combination to stabilize your liver and buy you another 5 years of life. It's a formula I developed during my residency at Johns Hopkins. It's not on the market. It exists only in my private database." She straightened her suit jacket, looking down at the most powerful man in the room with absolute certainty. "Release Yi-jun's ships. Now. And sign over the permanent docking rights for the Incheon North Terminal. In exchange, I'll personally oversee your treatment. If not, I'll leak your true medical files to your ambitious nephew by midnight. I believe he's already picked out your coffin." Elder Choi looked at the tablet, then at Yi-jun, then finally at Angela. He saw no mercy in her eyes, only a cold, strategic intelligence that was far more dangerous than any gun. He realized then that Yi-jun hadn't brought a trophy into his house, he had brought a partner who could dismantle an empire with a single glance. "Release the ships," Choi whispered, his voice trembling. "And bring me the contract for the terminal." As they walked out of the club and into the cool Seoul night, Yi-jun stopped by the car. He looked at Angela, his unreadable expression finally breaking into a look of genuine, chilling respect. He reached out, his hand lingering near her neck, tracing the line of her jaw with a touch that was finally starting to feel less like an alliance and more like a shared obsession. "You didn't tell me you had Choi's pathologist in your pocket," Yi-jun murmured. "A good doctor always keeps a full history of her enemies," Angela replied, stepping into the car. "I told you, Yi-jun. I'm done healing. I'm here to rule." Yi-jun closed the door and sat beside her, the silent predator finally recognizing his queen. The underworld debut was over. Angela Daniels had officially arrived, and the city would never be the same. The silence in Minato's penthouse was no longer the prestigious, hushed calm of the elite. It was the hollow, ringing silence of a tomb. The electricity had been cut 2 hours ago, leaving the expansive living room draped in long, jagged shadows. Minato sat on the floor, his back against the designer sofa that was already tagged for repossession. The only light came from the moon reflecting off the empty bottles of expensive scotch he'd drained, trying to numb the reality that his miracle life had vanished in less than 48 hours. He jumped when the keypad on the front door emitted a series of crisp, electronic chirps. The lock turned with a heavy, mechanical thud. He hadn't given anyone the code. But then again, he no longer owned the door. 3 men stepped into the apartment. They didn't move like common thugs, they moved like shadows, precise, silent, and draped in the kind of high-end tailoring that signaled Yi-jun's absolute authority. Leading them was Tae-hoon, Yi-jun's most trusted lieutenant, a man whose calm demeanor was far more terrifying than any outward display of rage. "Mr. Hua," Tae-hoon said, his voice smooth and professional as he clicked on a high-powered tactical flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, pinning Minato against the sofa like a trapped insect. "You've been difficult to reach. Your secondary lines are disconnected." I'm working on it," Minato stammered, shielding his eyes. He tried to stand, but his legs were leaden. "The banks, there was a mistake. Angela, my wife, she'll fix it once she calms down." "Dr. Daniels is no longer your wife, Minato," Tae-hoon replied, stepping closer. The light caught the glint of the tablet in his hand. "And she is certainly not calming down. She has spent the afternoon reviewing the personal ledger she acquired from Mr. Kang. Your gambling debts to the syndicate were settled in full by her yesterday morning. Legally, she now owns your debt, and she has decided to collect the interest." Minato's heart hammered against his ribs. "The interest? I don't have any money left. She took the accounts. She took the cars." "Wealth isn't the only thing you owe her," Tae-hoon said. He gestured to the 2 men behind him. "The interest on a betrayal of this magnitude is calculated in dignity." The 2 men moved forward with practiced efficiency. They didn't strike him. Instead, they began to systematically strip the apartment of its last remnants of Minato. They took the bespoke watches from the velvet-lined drawer in the bedroom. They took the limited edition shoes. They even took the silk tie from around his neck. "What are you doing?" Minato cried, his voice cracking. "That's all I have left." You have your health, Taehoon noted, looking up from the tablet. For now. Dr. Daniels noted that you've been using her private medical account to fund your mother's luxury spa treatments and your sister's dental veneers. Those have been categorized as unauthorized expenditures. To settle the immediate interest, we are here to collect the physical collateral. One of the men reached down and grabbed Minutho's wrist, unbuckling the heavy Patek Philippe watch Angela had given him for their 3rd anniversary. It was the last symbol of the man he used to be. Minutho tried to pull away, but the grip on his arm was like a vice. She sent a message with the ledger, Taehoon said, leaning down so his cold eyes were inches from Minutho's. She said that since you were so concerned with Hannah's delicate state, you should experience what it's like to live without a safety net. No doctors. No drivers. No legacy. Taehoon reached into his pocket and tossed a cheap, plastic burner phone onto the floor. It clattered in the darkness. There is one contact in that phone. It's for a construction labor firm in the docks. It's the only place in Seoul that will hire a man with your current credit rating. If you miss a single shift, the debt moves from the financial category to the physical one. Do I make myself clear? Minutho looked at the burner phone, then up at the dark silhouettes of the men who had just erased his existence. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Angela hadn't just divorced him. She had bought his life, turned it into a commodity, and handed the management of his misery over to the Mafia. She's a monster, Minutho whispered, his pride finally breaking into a sob. No, Taehoon replied, turning toward the door as his men finished their work. She's a queen. And you were just a commoner who forgot his place. As they stepped out, Taehoon paused at the threshold. By the way, the lease on this unit expires at midnight. The new tenant arrives at dawn. I'd suggest you start walking. It's a long way to the docks. The door slammed shut, and the electronic lock engaged with a final, chilling click. Minutho was left in the dark, clutching a $10 burner phone, the silence of the penthouse now a deafening reminder of everything he had thrown away for a lie. The interest had been paid, and he was finally, utterly alone. The grand ballroom of the Schiller Hotel was a sea of shimmering silk and cut crystal, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the hushed, polite gossip of Seoul's most powerful families. This was the pinnacle of the social season, the annual Blue Diamond Gala. It was the very event where, only a year ago, Minutho had presented Angela as his lovely American accessory. Tonight, the dynamic was different. Minutho and Hannah stood in a shadowed corner of the ballroom, looking like ghosts of their former selves. Hannah was draped in a vintage gown that was clearly 2 seasons old, her delicate face hidden behind a thick layer of makeup to mask the hollows of her cheeks. Minutho's tuxedo was rumpled, his eyes darting toward the entrance with the frantic energy of a man waiting for a miracle or an executioner. They had managed to get in using a defunct corporate pass, a final, desperate gamble to beg their old associates for a loan. The murmuring in the room died instantly as the grand doors swung open. Angela didn't just walk into the room, she commanded the space around her. She was a vision of statuesque composure, wearing a gown of structured, architectural white, a deliberate reclamation of the color she had worn to her aborted wedding. It was elegant, cold, and suggested absolute authority. Beside her, Yi-jun walked with a controlled, predatory grace. He didn't need to speak, his silent dominance shifted the room's gravity. The visible tattoos on his neck, peeking over his crisp black collar, were a stark reminder that the woman on his arm was now under the most dangerous protection in the country. Look at her, Hannah whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of envy and terror. She's acting like she owns the place. She does own the place, Minutho hissed, his grip tightening on his empty glass. She bought the Hua Group's outstanding bonds this morning. We're standing in her house, Hannah. As the guest of honor, Angela was invited to the podium to deliver the keynote address. The elite of Seoul watched, breathless, as she stepped up. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a judge. Good evening, Angela said, her voice a cool, clear bell that reached every corner of the silent hall. For years, I believed that the strength of a community was built on the care we provide to the most vulnerable. I spent my career, and my personal wealth, supporting those I thought were in need. She paused, her gaze landing directly on Minutho and Hannah. But I have recently learned that some vulnerabilities are mere costumes, and some miracles are carefully crafted lies. With a subtle nod to the tech booth, the massive high-definition screens behind her flickered to life. The audience gasped. Instead of a corporate presentation, the screens displayed a series of medical documents, laboratory toxicology reports, and surveillance stills. These, Angela continued, her voice clinical and detached, are the records for patient Hannah. You will see the line item purchases for synthetic hormone mimics used to simulate a high-risk pregnancy. You will also see the time-stamped logs of a private lab technician, since terminated, who was paid to forge the MRI of a brain tumor that was, in fact, stolen from a deceased patient. The ballroom exploded into a cacophony of shocked whispers. The matrons who had once pitied Hannah now turned to look at her with visceral disgust. The Hua family legacy wasn't built on business acumen, Angela said, her eyes as sharp and unflinching as a scalpel. It was built on a foundation of blood-sucking fraud. They didn't just take my money, they took the compassion of everyone in this room to fund a lifestyle they didn't earn. Hannah let out a choked sob, trying to flee, but Yi Jun's men were already positioned at the exits, their presence a silent barrier. Minute Ho, pushed past the point of sanity by the public destruction of his last shred of dignity, stumbled toward the podium. Angela! Stop this! You're being cruel. We were a family. He reached the base of the stage and fell to his knees, his pride completely stripped away in front of the cameras and the elite. He grabbed at the hem of her gown, his face raw with a panic that bordered on collapse. Please. I'll do anything. I'll leave Hannah. I'll come back to you. Just tell them it's a mistake. Angela looked down at him from her height on the stage. Her expression remained unreadable, almost chilling in its lack of sympathy. She didn't pull away in anger. She simply looked at his hand on her dress as if it were a minor, unpleasant stain. The only mistake I made, Minute Ho, she said, her voice carrying over the microphone for the entire world to hear, was thinking you were a man worth saving. You took my loyalty for a lack of options. Now, you'll find that I have plenty. She looked toward Yi Jun, who stood at the foot of the stairs, his expression a mask of quiet ownership. He stepped forward, removing Minute Ho's hand from Angela's gown with the effortless strength of a predator. Angela stepped off the stage, walking past her former fiancé as if he were nothing more than a ghost. The final gala wasn't just an exposure, it was an erasure. As she left the room on Yi Jun's arm, the elite of Seoul turned their backs on Minute Ho, leaving him kneeling in the middle of the ballroom, a man who had lost his queen, his crown, and finally, his soul. The private moonlight garden of Yi Jun's estate was a sanctuary of frozen beauty. White camellias, illuminated by the silver glow of a Seoul winter moon, looked like carved marble against the dark, manicured hedges. The air was crisp, turning every breath into a fleeting phantom. Angela stood at the center of the stone path, draped in a structured coat of midnight silk that shimmered with a subtle, dangerous luster. She held a single white rose, not with the trembling hope of a bride, but with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a specimen. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story from. I want to know how far it has traveled. A rustle in the shadows broke the stillness. Minute Ho stumbled into the clearing, looking less like the man who had once walked the halls of power and more like a ghost haunted by his own choices. His designer suit was stained and wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes, once bright with a shallow, arrogant confidence, were now rimmed with the raw red of exhaustion and panic. He stopped 10 feet away, his breath hitching as he looked at her. He saw the statuesque woman who had once been his anchor, but the warmth he had spent 6 years taking for granted had been replaced by a terrifying, glacial composure. Angela, he whispered, his voice cracking. I went to the apartment. The locks were changed. The firm, they told me my name has been scrubbed from every patent. I have nothing. Angela didn't move. She didn't flinch at the sound of his voice. She simply watched him, her expression as unreadable and chilling as the winter night. You have Hannah, Angela said, her voice a cool, level vibration that seemed to drop the temperature of the garden even further. I believe you told me she was the only one who could truly save you. Why are you here, Minute Ho? At the mention of Hannah's name, Minute Ho's face contorted into a mask of visceral loathing. He took a staggering step forward. She's a monster. She lied about the baby. She lied about the cancer. She used me to drain your accounts, Angela. She saw me as a meal ticket, nothing more. I was a fool. I was blinded by her, her weakness. You weren't blinded by her weakness, Angela corrected him, her gaze unflinching. You were seduced by the idea that you were a god who could save her. You wanted to feel superior, and you thought I was too strong to provide you with that shallow satisfaction. So, you chose a lie that made you feel powerful over a truth that made you equal. Minute-Ho's pride finally collapsed entirely. He fell to his knees in the dirt, the sound of his knees hitting the gravel a sharp, pathetic crack in the silence. He crawled toward her, reaching out with trembling hands to grab the hem of her coat. He looked up at her, his expression raw and pleading, bordering on a total psychological undoing. "Please, Angela," he sobbed, his face pressed near her boots. "I know I don't deserve it. I know I was a coward. But I can't live like this. The docks, the debt collectors. I'm losing my mind. You were always the one with the answers. You were always the one who knew how to fix everything. Fix this. Fix me. I'll be anything you want. I'll be your servant. Just don't leave me in the dark." Angela looked down at him, her eyes steady and resolute. There was no visible anger, no flickering flame of jealousy, and, most devastatingly for Minute-Ho, not a trace of sympathy. She looked at the man kneeling in the dirt the way one looks at a discarded piece of trash that had once been a useful tool. "I'm a doctor, Minute-Ho," she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "I spent years diagnosing your family's greed as ambition and your betrayal as confusion. But I finally learned the difference between a patient who can be saved and a cancer that must be excised." She reached down, her gloved hand moving toward his face. For a heartbeat, a flicker of hope crossed Minute-Ho's features. He leaned into her touch, thinking he had found a crack in her armor. But Angela didn't stroke his cheek. She placed 2 fingers under his chin and forced him to look up, not at her, but at the shadow standing just behind her. Yi-jun stepped out from the darkness of the hedges. He stood with a cold, controlled dominance, his black suit blending into the night, his presence alone shifting the balance of power. He didn't intervene, he didn't need to. He simply stood there, a silent predator watching over his queen. "He's waiting for you to say something, Angela," Yi-jun said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Angela let go of Minute-Ho's chin as if he were a soiled garment. She stood back up to her full, statuesque height, her composure absolute. "I have nothing to say to a man who no longer exists in my world," Angela said. She turned her back on him, her dark silk coat swirling around her like a shroud. "Angela! No! Don't walk away!" Minute-Ho screamed, reaching out for her one last time. But his hand caught only empty air. As she walked back toward the mansion on Yi-jun's arm, she didn't look back. She didn't hear his pleas or his broken sobs. She looked forward at the life she had built on the ruins of her own heart, a life where she was no longer the woman who served, but the woman who ruled with a heart of ice. The reversal was complete, the love brain was dead, and the queen had finally ascended her throne. The cold bite of the winter wind was nothing compared to the absolute silence emanating from Angela as she looked down at the wreckage of the man who had once been her world. Minute-Ho remained collapsed on the gravel, his fingers digging into the frozen earth, a desperate, hollow shell of a man who had traded a diamond for a shard of jagged glass. He looked up at her, his face a map of ruin, searching for even a glimmer of the woman who had once loved him unconditionally. He found nothing. Her eyes were steady, unflinching, and resolute, a dark, beautiful mirror reflecting only his own failure. Yi-jun stepped into the moonlight, the shadows of the garden accentuating the sharp, intimidating lines of his black suit and the dark ink that marked his throat. He didn't look at Minute-Ho with anger, he looked at him with the chilling indifference of a predator who had already won. He placed a hand on Angela's shoulder, a gesture of quiet ownership and a public declaration of the shift in the world's axis. "You heard her, Minute-Ho," Yi-jun said, his voice a low, vibrating growl that seemed to rattle the very air. "You no longer exist. To her, to me, or to this city. You are a ghost, and I don't permit ghosts to haunt my property." Minute-Ho's breath hitched, a sob racking his chest. "Yi-jun, please, she's a doctor, she has a heart, she can't just let me rot." "She is a doctor who has finished her surgery," Yi-jun replied, his expression unreadable and terrifyingly calm. He looked at Angela, and for the first time, a flicker of something resembling genuine admiration softened the edges of his glacial gaze. "And she is no longer the woman you took for granted. In my house, In the empire we are building together, there is only one authority. Her word is the only law I recognize. Her will is the shadow I cast. He turned his gaze back to the man in the dirt. If you ever breathe her name again, or if your shadow even crosses the threshold of her sight, you won't be dealing with a debt collector. You'll be dealing with me. And I am far less patient than the woman you betrayed. Yi-jun didn't wait for a response. He didn't need one. He tucked Angela's arm into his, leading her away from the kneeling man as if he were nothing more than a fallen branch on a pristine path. The sound of their footsteps on the gravel was rhythmic and final. Behind them, Minute-Ho's strength finally gave out. He slumped forward, his forehead touching the cold stones, his hands reaching for the hem of a gown that was already gone. He was left in the dark, surrounded by the scent of white roses that now smelled like a funeral, clutching at a $10 burner phone that was his only connection to a reality he had once thought himself too good for. As they reached the heavy glass doors of the mansion, Angela paused. She didn't look back at the garden. She looked at the black diamond glinting on her hand, a stone forged under immense pressure, just like her. The statuesque composure she had maintained throughout the night didn't break, it solidified into something permanent. She had traded the softness of a sacrificial lamb for the steel of an empress. Inside, the lights were warm, but the atmosphere remained sharp and high status. Yi-jun stopped and looked at her, his hand lingering near her neck, his thumb tracing the pulse that was slow, steady, and entirely under her control. The engine has taken the wheel, he murmured, a rare, dangerous light in his eyes. And I'm not stopping until the road is clear, Angela replied. They left the broken past behind, moving into the sanctuary of their shared power. Minute-Ho was left in the dust of the life he had discarded, a tragic reminder of what happens when a man mistakes a woman's loyalty for a lack of strength. Educational message. Never mistake a woman's silence for weakness, or her loyalty for a lack of options. True strength doesn't scream, it waits for the right moment to let the consequences of your own actions destroy you. Always value the person who builds you up, because once they decide to stop, your fall will be twice as fast. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story from. God bless you, and may courage guide your hands. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I am leaving you with one of the channel's most beloved story. I am sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.